Perfect. We're live. All right. Awesome. So, give me 1 second. Okay. So, am I pronouncing your last name properly? Cruz, Dr. Cruz.
It gets pronounced lots of different ways.
Oh, it,
Cruz is fine.
oh, Cruz.
Cruz is
Okay.
fine.
Awesome. Okay. So, okay. So, tell me a little bit about you first, and your background, and
So I was I practiced psychiatry for 30 years in San Francisco. I'm in on the Big Island of Hawaii now for the last 2 years,
okay.
and I also have a PhD in basic neuroscience. And I got interested in ADHD because the very first patient that was referred to me after I finished residency was a 45-year-old guy,
Yeah.
and he had been in psychotherapy for 6 years with a well-respected therapist who had made no progress, and he had referred this guy to the university hospital for an evaluation. So this was 94, and we did 3 days of neuropsych testing, and they said, this was an 8-year-old guy or boy. We would be sure he has ADHD, but that doesn't even exist in adults. So
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
I looked at them, and everything I was seeing was ADHD. There were times there was depression in the picture, there was some anxiety, but clearly symptom after symptom fit with ADHD.
So could you define what when you see someone you're like, okay, this person definitely has ADHD. What does that mean? Like what exactly do you go by the DSM-5? I mean, is just the DSM-5 kind of like questions or
So I do review the DFM-5 questions. So those are 18 symptoms, 9 of which are inattentive, 9 of which are hyperactive or impulsive. And those are a useful guide, but they actually miss a lot of aspects of ADHD. So one thing that's out there, for example, is time perception and time management. We have good experimental data
sorry,
that
one
show
second.
that people with ADHD don't experience time in the same way or with the same consistency and aren't able to track or they're late for appointments. And those symptoms aren't anywhere represented in the DSM criteria. Another important one is emotional dysregulation, which is there in at least two-thirds of people with ADHD. So the DSM is a useful guideline, but it's not perfect.
Okay, but how do you quantify like okay, so you say time management. How do you find
So,
yeah.
so, so it's a good. I mean, so part of it does rely on clinical experience and judgment. So one of my questions is asking, are you frequently late for work or meeting friends or friends? And often people with ADHD say, oh, I'm never late for work. And I'll say that you're just telling me your boss reprimanded you for showing up a half hour late. And he said, oh, I was late that day. All the other days I'm coming in 10 to 20 minutes after I'm supposed to be there, but in their head, that's not late.
Yeah,
And
but
so
got it. Okay, but isn't it
part of it is that you have to make a clinical judgment whether this person's behavior is outside the norms for their age and for their sort of peer group. So, a 10-year-old is not expected to measure time or do things as well as a 25-year-old. So some of it we have to be aware of what society expects. And
okay, and then so do you have ADHD yourself?
I think I'm sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum, where I'm traditionally been hyper organized or
So you were never late to meetings?
never.
Never in your life you can recall that you were late to a meeting or
Oh, I can remember once when I had to meet with my mentor, who was the chairman of the psychiatry department. I had a flat tire on my bike, and he reprimanded me for why I relied on the bike to get around during residency training instead of a car like all my colleagues. And I told him that actually this was the one time I had been late, and every single of my residency cohorts who relied on a car was late many more times because of consistent.
Got it. So you're saying yes. So some people are just good at meeting people on time, but you don't think that there is that that's kind of a pattern that most people have, or at least people that don't properly maybe have discipline, or basically is this falsifiable? Like, how do you measure objectively that time, the not the missing meetings?
Objectively, I mean, whether we do it routinely or not, that would be really easy. How, when does a person show up for the appointment with me? If someone consistently is there on time or 5 minutes early, that's very different than someone who, either in person or online, I start the link and they're busy making coffee, or they're taking their kid to school still, or they're driving and just say, I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. Then you have objective data that session after session, they are late. Now, psychologically, we need to look at other factors. If they hate spending time with me, that could be a reason for being late. Many of these people, will say how much they're getting out of it, to appear connected and appear to be enjoying it. So the fact that they're late, we should be attributing to some cognitive problem that's making them not manage time now.
Okay. So let's say now based on your criteria, so you're saying you have the DSM-5 criteria plus you add your own kind of like other questions, which is like, what did you say, time, and what is another one that you add?
Emotional dysregulation. I mean, another one is when given series of instructions, are they missing steps along the way? So when I was working live out of my office, I had a home office, and there was two entrances to the house. There was a door upstairs to the house. There was a door at the end of the driveway where the office was a separate entrance. And I gave everyone always the same instructions of how to find the door to the office. And I actually tracked this. Whereas the only people out of the next 115 patients that I was seeing, the only patients who went up to the house door, patients with ADHD. Now, that didn't mean everyone with ADHD did that, but everyone who didn't have ADHD managed to listen to, go to the end of the driveway, look at the door there, it's not the house entrance. So again, getting derailed with a sequential series of tasks or instructions is also ethically part of ADHD, although it's not formally part of the DSM-5 criteria.
Okay.
And again, that's not just my observation, that's a general clinical observation.
Got it. So basically, it's usually the psychiatrist adds or takes out some elements and then kind of
Well,
makes their own judge.
I would say I hope so, because I think in this day and age, particularly younger professionals who are trained more recently are trained to just follow a checklist. And they'll just run through a checklist, listening to either what the patient says or what their first impression is. And that could well be, again, part of ADHD is not being attentive, including to your own behavior. So if you ask someone with ADHD, are they late often? They give you an inaccurate answer. So part of it is knowing how to listen and seeing how well what you're hearing about the history corresponds to how they're acting in the session. And that's also important. Sorry for the reverse. So lots of people are worried. There's hordes of people who are faking ADHD who are coming into offices just to get stimulants and other ADHD medication. And if someone's talking about how distracted they are, and yet they're unfocused and on point in every point during a 2-hour evaluation, then you at least have to reconcile why is what they're saying discrepant from what you're actually seeing. So part of it is thinking and listening, going through checklists, but part of it is observing what they're doing physically and what their speech patterns.
Yeah, but when the definition is vague, how do you actually know if you did manage to pinpoint the definition? So if no one, okay, so for example, if I go in for my broken leg, right? If I have a broken leg, if 1,000 patients have a broken leg, there's an image that indicates, right, that the leg is broken, and you can objectively say that the leg.
No, I don't agree with you even on that one. So
Why?
I have an example. I had a stress fracture,
A what? Sorry.
a stress fracture,
Okay.
and I had chronic tendonitis where a tendon inserted on part of my lower leg for the week before, which was causing extreme pain. And the X-ray that the X-ray isn't a perfect relator of what condition your bone is in. I mean, so that tendonitis progressed from a tendonitis to a stress fracture where there was a clear hairline fracture to the bone. If you can't define where exactly, day, what second it switched from free break to break. I agree, most breaks are simple, or there's a traumatic event that breaks. But even with something like a broken leg, we're with a spectrum of issues where sometimes our imaging is going to give us a concrete answer, is it broken or not? So with ADHD, actually compared to any other psychiatric diagnosis, it's actually quite, it's defined in terms of behavior. We don't need to know what's, with depression, we don't need to know how someone's feeling. With schizophrenia, we need to know what's their thinking and their thought patterns and what they decide to share about what's going on inside their head and how they explain it and how they describe it is highly subjective. Whereas with ADHD, it's a set of objective behavioral criteria, which is why it's fair to be able to diagnose somebody with ADHD just from looking at video data from how they're interacting with you, if you have enough data.
But didn't you say that the that you add to the definition, and that the definitions are not set, basically set in stone? No, you could add, if you how is it a.
I would say that it's good clinical practice to add your own knowledge and experience to what the official criteria, but we know the official criteria do a good job of designating one group of people who differ as a group on certain neuroanatomical, certain biochemical, certain rates of comorbidity and other conditions, mental health conditions, and that this group of people can make general predictions about how they will do in life, in terms of their longevity, in terms of their likelihood of finishing college. Does that mean we can pinpoint exactly what will happen to each individual? No. But as a group, it's a useful identifying label.
Okay, so now let's say you identify someone with ADHD. Um, what is your prescription? Like, how do you help them manage life better? Is it meds, or is there other ways?
So, an important, I mean, one is that even if they have ADHD, they're still an individual. So part of it is listening to them to find out what their goals are, what their hopes are, what their desires, what their barriers and problems are. If we look just at a symptomatic level, study after study for at least 30, 40 years has shown stimulant medications, particularly amphetamine-based medications, are the most potent tool in terms of helping the greatest percentage of people and helping them to the greatest extent. But that doesn't mean those are the first choice for everybody. They're the first choice for most.
Okay, so out of, let's say, out of 10 people that take ADHD meds, and especially amphetamines, what is the percentage of them that turn into addicts? Is there a number on that?
I've looked for hard data and it's extremely vague. So the papers will support numbers of about 1% to 2%. Will become addicted to amphetamines themselves, and it's really hard to track down what actual data those are coming from.
Okay,
To
so
put it
from
in perspective, though, people in the general US population, somewhere between 15 to 20% have an addiction to some substance. And people who have ADHD are at a much higher rate of getting into a substance addiction problem, and it's about double. It's about 30 to 40% of people with ADHD.
have an addiction
So
problem.
addiction to cigarettes, to alcohol, to gambling, to substances or things to clear addiction, and being on stimulant medication in the ADHD population. There's several very large, very well done epidemiologic studies put someone with ADHD's risk for a general substance abuse problem back to the general population. So yes, maybe 1 or 2% are becoming addicted to amphetamine. Probably 15 to 20% are reduced, are not becoming addicted to other substances. I mean, the data is pretty robust. You are reducing substance abuse risk if you have ADHD, if you take a stimulant.
Okay, so you're saying, so on one hand, yes, so people with ADHD, they have a way higher likelihood to be addicts, period.
Yeah.
Um, so knowing that, isn't it a little bit risky to prescribe something like an amphetamine to them? Because isn't amphetamines like very addictive?
They are addicted. I mean, they vary within the family, so it's clear that cocaine and methamphetamine, and there is a prescription form of methamphetamine, but amphetamine is a distinctly different molecule than methamphetamine, and the addiction potential is considerably higher for cocaine and meth, street stimulants, than for our prescription stimulant. It's not zero, it's still there. So part of informed consent is letting patients know there is a risk for getting addicted to this very medication that may be helping you. But there, more to your point, there's actually several studies now of people who actually already have a substance abuse problem and clearly have ADHD, and even in some rehab treatment settings, prescribing stimulants for those people with ADHD in general has had a positive effect in terms of helping them stick with the program, helping them follow the behavioral criteria, reducing the rates of addiction. And it's particularly Vyvanse, that's amphetamine that's been helpful in those settings.
Okay, so I found one stat. I was trying to find a stat on how many people get addicted to Adderall a year. So I found one, but that's very old. It's from 2012. Obviously, it's probably higher since then, but in 2012 alone, there was 116,000 people in the US that admitted themselves to rehab due to Adderall addiction. So I'm going to assume that that number is significantly higher uh, today. Um, so knowing that, and this
Yeah,
is
that's not a number I'm familiar with, and I actually need to look at what that doesn't seem plausible to me,
um,
but
okay. So let me here. Let me pull out the number. Um,
and, are, and there's a question, is that a medication they're on or a
sorry.
substance they're taking appropriately, or is that what they're actually seeking treatment for? 'Cause I don't find it at all plausible that there's that many people seeking treatment specifically for Adderall abuse.
Okay, so I am reading from the Addiction Center. I can send you the link over email right now. But
Yeah,
this is um,
my research, an addiction center is a for-profit corporation that's making money by putting people in addiction centers and often using treatments that are not tested or objectively approved.
okay. So well, okay. So here's my question. Of course, what I'm about to tell you is anecdotal, right? But this anecdotal story is kind of very known, and it seems to be dismissed a lot. But if you're saying that their numbers are wrong, personally, okay, I didn't trick the system into getting admitted as someone with ADHD. I got in. I was uh, uh, just a quick story. I was diagnosed with ADHD at a young age. but I was also very gifted. I got into university at a very young age, at like around 14, I think. I got into this early program. I didn't complete it. I wouldn't, I mean, I did well in STEM, but I usually things that I was bored of, I didn't do at all. So I would get zero. Um, in Israel, we have a different scoring system. It's either zero or 100, so I would get zero. But the point is, I'm saying is like, I didn't trick the diagnosis. I'm definitely what you would call, and according to most people, ADHD. I took Adderall, and this story is very repetitive. I've seen this story many times in addiction centers. Like, I started with Adderall, as prescribed. I have an addictive personality. I started with five, went to 10, went to 20, went to 4, went to 30, went to 40, then to 80, and then I learned one day that you can abuse it. That it feels good to take 200 milligrams. And I don't know. Yeah, so I went to that. I started abusing it, and abusing it, you start once in a while. You have these days where you abuse it a lot, and then from there you go to, and then you learn one day this is by luck. You meet someone, whatever. Meth is not you try meth, and then meth is actually, even though the whole one molecule way is a thing. Obviously, people discuss that, but it doesn't really feel that different when you do both. If you ask people who tried both Adderall and meth, it's the same feeling. It's just like with Adderall, you have to take more in order to feel a quick hit from meth, but it's the same feeling. So and
Yeah,
now you, if you,
that I'd say similar is what I hear, but not the same.
well, if you take enough, it's the same feeling again. Like, is it as strong? Like you could take a small hit. It's an amphetamine. You feel you tweak, quote unquote. So and now you meet a lot of people. If you went tomorrow to any addiction center, you'll meet this story over and over again. It's people, meth heads that did Adderall people
Well,
who did meth, and vice versa. It's the same. What I'm trying to get at is, why is there no attention to this
well,
part?
so when you're telling the story, that's my question right away, is who's prescribing this view that you're going up from 5 to 10 to 20 to 80, and without any warning or discussion that there is, that this is a potentially addictive substance. So I would put things, solidly on whoever was prescribing for you. They screwed up, unless you were getting it entirely from friends or without the prescribing.
Yes, okay, that's fair. You could say that the you could blame it slightly on the but here's the thing, right? When I was in that mindset, I overrode the doctor, meaning like I figured out ways to get, because you're so into it, you become so dependent that you need a higher dosage because you're so work addicted that you're
Mhm.
like, I don't care what the doctor says. I'm going to go higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, but I would say that's still their responsibility if they're prescribing to be monitoring for that and to be, and I mean, they're writing for a higher amount because something strange is going on.
But do
So
people,
I'll back up a little bit. This is on one of my talks on my YouTube channel in terms of if you talk to the ADHD specialists about tolerance to stimulants, almost all of them will say the same answer, that there's some adjustment period in the first weeks or months, and then most people find a dose that works for them, and that dose continues to work, and that people tend to not escalate higher and higher doses. If you go to the addiction specialist, you hear exactly the opposite thing. They will say absolutely everyone on stimulants that's tolerant and needs to go higher and higher, and that's so they are diametrically opposed, and there's virtually no data on it. So I looked at, this is one of the few things I look at other than that, who goes to which door at my office. I actually looked at my own numbers, and this is during COVID, but I looked at the first 100 patients alphabetically who had been stable on a dose of stimulants for at least a year, so they're not in any transition, dosing up, titrating up. And I looked at a year later, were they on the same dose? Were they on a higher dose? Or on a lower dose? And I made simple equivalents for people who switch between Ritalin and Adderall, and there's equivalences between Vyvanse and other forms. And in my own practice, and I'm not saying this represents the whole world, a little more than 80% of people are on exactly the same dose a year later, which is about what I predicted. And of the remaining percentage, they were actually evenly split. 10% had gone down on the dose, about 10% had gone up on the dose. And why I think it's important that that was during COVID is I think, at least in the US, it's a time of so much anxiety that was, it probably boosted the percentage of people who went down on their dose. So they were feeling more anxious from situational factors, needed rest. But at least in my own experience, the things I would say is one, it showed that I wasn't sort of, it showed that patients at least were comfortable in terms of bringing up the question of going higher or lower. So I wasn't someone, there are many practitioners that say, you can't go up at all. I'm not going to change anything. You know, if you take their data, no one's going to change. That doesn't show anything. But at least this shows that I'm open and not discouraging the possibility of changing this. But the very large percentage of people were stable over at least 2 years, because again, they had to be stable for a year before I included them, and they had to be stable in the examination year. So I'm not saying it's not that nobody has into problems, but I'm saying it's not the norm in the ADHD population.
So it's not the norm. So you're saying within a year it's not the norm. What about 5 years?
I haven't done the data, but my own, I mean, my own impression of my data was what I predicted is exactly what I saw. So I would think the numbers are pretty close to the same for 5 years
For
now.
even so, even for 5 years, it's the same.
Yeah, I have people I've worked with for 25, 30 years now.
And they're doing 10 milligrams or 5 milligrams or same amount.
Whatever they were doing, that's far and away.
Okay, so how could we know what's the split? Because you're saying that you don't want to take the data on the 116,000. You don't accept that data. So
No,
is there?
don't correspond to the CDC's abuse data at all.
Okay, so do we know? Does anyone know how many people admit themselves to rehab based on Adderall addiction every year? Is there a number that could be
I mean,
accepted?
the CDC keeps records of what numbers of people run into problems with a whole range of different substances. Now that's slightly different than who winds up in a rehab setting, which is partly self-referral and partly referring doctors' judgment. And clearly, the majority of people who have addiction problems don't even wind up in a rehab setting. You know, they're untreated, but the CDC does track.
Okay, so
And their data indicate that stimulants have a far greater risk, a far greater proportion of people running into addiction problems, and that although stimulant use has gone up markedly in the last few years, it's still completely dwarfed by opioid problems.
so since we don't know the numbers, the addiction numbers, because I looked at CDC. The CDC just says like I feel like they're vague a little bit. They're just saying, hey, we had X deaths, overdose deaths from addiction. I don't think they break it down by like pill or by chemical. I couldn't find anything on that.
Yeah, they break it down by classes. You
Oh,
know,
they do?
separate Adderall from, I mean, stimulants are,
Got it. So you're saying that there is something on addiction on stimulants. Um,
and officially it's substance use disorders rather than addiction.
oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so which 37? Okay, so 30% of drug overdose deaths in 2021, according to the CDC, is from stimulants. So that means out of 30,000 deaths, that's about 10,000 deaths a year. Um, yeah, that's according to them. So knowing that, and I'm assuming obviously the deaths is the extreme. Sorry.
Go on. But, uh, what I'm going to say, and pretty often it might not be fair, is that people die from ADHD, and that is fact that is so often ignored because ADHD is so often trivialized. The rate of early death, ADHD cuts as much as 10 years off the average person's life. That's as big as an effect as diabetes, as big an effect as depression. And of those deaths, about half are suicide and about half are accidents. But this is not a trivial condition. And when you brought up anecdotes, I have anecdotes of people who I would argue died because rehab centers or even general psychiatric centers completely missed the ADHD diagnosis.
Got it. So you're saying regardless, they're doomed. They're doomed to a tough
Well, I'm
life.
not saying regardless what you're doing. I'm saying that if you're upset that some people are getting into addiction problems, and that means no one should be on stimulants, that's not a fair conclusion. That would be saying, 40,000 people die in car accidents. Nobody should ever get into a car. There's other values, other goods, and maybe lives are being saved by instead of having to walk to a hospital, you can get in an ambulance vehicle. So you have to look at the whole picture. I'm not saying ignore those who are into addiction problems. I'm saying you can't use that as a condemnation of the whole field.
Well, here's what I mean.
Population, it's
Sorry?
an increased risk of it's the population with an increased risk of death to begin with.
Yes. So you're saying the baseline already, this population of ADHD people, which is again hard to. Okay, they have a higher risk for early deaths, accidents, suicide, etc., and a rough time in life. So you're saying that because of that baseline, then we should add another. Isn't it adding another risk factor to their lives?
Well, again, if you look at the data, what do you see with car accidents on people who are medicated with stimulants? The rate of car accidents drops dramatically. The rates of suicide drop substantially. So there's absolutely no question, are we saving lives in general by putting people with ADHD on stimulants? The answer is yes. It's similar to maybe a better analogy is the difference between autonomous driving cars and people driving cars. Some of the data is that right now the autonomous cars are now safe as human drivers, but we're not. Every time an autonomous car hits someone or injures someone, it's headline news. And people wring their hands and say, we absolutely shouldn't do this. This is horrible. These are killing people. And the data so far, and I'm not an expert on the data, is that they're actually as safe as, but it's probably going to need to be 10 times safer before they're accepted by society.
Okay, so fair question. So okay, so there are 40,000, around 40,000 motor vehicles deaths in the U.S. A year, and then there are 10,000. Like we said, there's about 10,000 deaths, and that's not including all the negative impacts of let's say people who were rehab addict, went to rehab for Adderall and didn't die, right? But that's 10,000 deaths from stimulants. Do you think it's possible? Again, I didn't do the math here, but like, is it possible that the saving of cars of deaths from cars from people with ADHD is way smaller than the amount of deaths from the 10,000 deaths? Because that 40,000 number is like total of any type of person
No, I
ADHD.
mean, again, the data is pretty clear. The net savings is you are saving lives.
But I'm saying once you counteract that with the overdose deaths, do you,
Yeah,
okay, so what
yeah,
is the percentage? So how many people were saved versus how many people died? If you compare the two, is it net positive,
it's net positive.
even after considering the deaths of
Yeah,
overdose?
net means considering pluses and minuses. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying it's
Yeah.
it's positive, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then what if you count? Well, again, we can't count the second variable, which is um, the non-overdose people, right? Because we said there's 10,000, but then what about the people that are rehab, go to rehab or or try to get out of the drug. Okay, so for example, for me, the hard part was not quitting. The physical addiction of Adderall is not the hard part. People don't talk about that, but it's yeah, that was like about a week where I was very like it was difficult for me physically, but it's the psychology. The It took me like about I think 3 years to fully say, oh, I could do things myself without it. Um,
Mhm.
which is a long journey. It was very, very difficult. But the point is, I'm saying, and also just to add to you're saying, yes, the first few years were wonderful, like very, very effective. I would say the first 5 years on Adderall were wonderful. But it's really what happens after. So my question is like, considering that, isn't isn't there isn't it better to try at least really really hard to do it without meds? Is there okay, so let's move to the second segment, which is, do you
No,
know?
no. And so I'll look at I've treated several hundred people. I've only had one person who felt that they ran into an addiction problem. One. And hundreds who felt that their lives were markedly more manageable. And I'm looking at people, I start usually with a non-stimulant. I use cognitive behavioral approaches, so I'm not saying that I primarily focus on stimulants, but I actually think there's a bigger problem than addiction with stimulants, particularly Adderall, and that's psychosis. And people all the time, including critics of these, sort of lump psychosis as a weird, rare, or a intrinsically part of addiction. It's a completely separate problem, but a horrible one.
So sorry, you're saying psychosis?
Yeah, 1 out of 500 people on amphetamine products over time will become floridly psychotic, out of touch with reality, hallucinating, paranoid, and of that 1 out of 500, if you follow them over the next 15 or 20 years, about 1 out of 5 again will be in a permanent schizophrenic-like state. And virtually every patient I've had who's been treated by other professionals, including some of people who are treated by the biggest names and people who write books and start clinics, tell me nobody ever told me about the risk of psychosis.
Okay, so wow, you see, I didn't
Yeah.
even know about that. So you're saying psychosis because that's a real thing with meth addicts as well. It's like psychosis
Oh,
is a
yeah.
really big problem. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I can't really tell if but I feel like I had some early versions of psychosis also. But you're so interesting. I didn't even know about that. So you're saying 1 out of 500, 1 out of 500 will develop some psychosis from
Yeah.
using Adderall over 10 years or whatever.
Yeah. And of those who have a single event, 1 out of those 5 will actually wind up with a permanent psychotic state.
Oh fuck.
And that's,
So it could become permanent.
I mean, permanent, I mean, for at least like 15 or 20 years, whether any of those people recover or not. I mean, I would call that permanent, and it's been going on for years.
Okay, so let's move to this segment because this is important. I really feel like the viewers could, what, considering that some people are afraid, right? Like some people like me or that have seen the negatives, right? I'm on the camp. I have a bias, obviously. I'm against it completely. And the people who are like me also are against it, like who witnessed it, right? So for people like us and for people who are maybe about to walk into your clinic and want help, is there, let's say you had only one option, which is like the natural way, or the therapy or whatever. When I say natural, I mean like non-medication way, whatever that is. What is the most effective in the non-medication category to manage your ADHD?
So I'm going to give you two sort of different answers. So one is we have several cognitive behavioral therapeutic approaches that have been adapted specifically for ADHD and that
Okay.
help manage symptoms or even reduce them. But separate from that, if we're talking about lifestyle issues, I would say whether you're on medication or not, if you don't get your sleep regulated, you are probably going to be living with ongoing problems. And if you get your sleep regulated, that's a huge benefit. And regulated doesn't mean just getting about 8 hours every night. It means getting the same 8 hours every night. And that's really hard for many people with ADHD to do, but it's probably the single most important single variable that I'm aware of for helping people.
That I completely agree with you. Like that's it's interesting how that's a massive effect that yeah, the sleep, it's amazing. Like when you get the 8 hours or 7 hours, whatever. I think everyone's different there, but yeah, yeah, it's correct. Yeah, but what about, another thing that I find that's interesting? I wonder if you know any literature about this, or it's very paradoxical because some literature says sugar is good for people with ADHD, but what I learned is that when I quit sugar completely, because my crashes disappeared, because when I would eat a lot, I used to be addicted to sugar like crazy, so I would eat a lot and it will crash me during the day. I would have these like big crashes, and then the ADHD during the crashes will be like really high, right? I wouldn't be able to focus. I would just go into negative habits. So quitting, so yes, sugar is great for like instant, right? Like the instant part is great. You kind of could focus on a task or whatever when you eat sugar right away. But then the day, the whole, throughout the day, it's kind of like when it's like almost like you didn't sleep the night before. You have way higher waves, and I wonder if you know anything about like what could you corroborate or like discuss about sugar and ADHD? Yeah.
So it's a messy question. I mean, the simple question is, does sugar make someone, like kids particularly hyperactive, has been looked at in something more than a dozen different studies. And whether it's assessed by a kid, by a parent, by a teacher, if you dose them with sugar and look at how they behave in the next hour or two, you can't find measurable effect. So the common explanation there is that when kids are hyped up at a birthday party or eating lots of cake or sugar, that it's probably as much the situational factors adding specifically to hyperactivity and ADHD. On the other hand, Robert Lustig, who's a big enemy of sugar, he's an endocrinologist at UCSF, has written pretty powerfully about sugar's effect on the reward system and that how it's essentially retraining, getting a dopamine hit. And so the problems of sugar may be much more related to motivation and set points for happiness or contentment rather than and potentially energy effects as well. But that's not exactly ADHD itself. I mean, there's a huge interaction there. So clinically, I have lots of people who say they can tell just what you said, that their energy or even attention might spike after they've had sugar and it crashes sometime after that. But again, that's in controlled studies, it's really hard to find that effect.
Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, and then what are there? Okay, so you're saying cognitive behavioral therapy is one. You're saying sleep is second. Is there other ones that you know throughout your career that like you're like, okay,
Well,
these are really really good.
one of the cornerstones of the CBT approach for dealing with ADHD is setting up a schedule and setting up a task. I tell people when they're scheduling that they should make sure they have 4 things in place before they're putting any homework, school, business assignments, or whatever. Sleep is number one, eating. So that other than people who are consciously dieting, the only group of people I have coming into my office is that, oh my God, yesterday it was 4 o'clock and I realized I hadn't eaten lunch or breakfast all day. That almost is diagnostic for ADHD because people without ADHD have better awareness of their own bodies and or passing of time and okay, it's noon, I should be eating something. And if you're not well fueled, that's not a good recipe for your brain working throughout the day. So sleep, eating, some amount of physical activity, whether you want to you should have some regular and robust exercise, but you should have some movement in your day. There's a lot of data, particularly on kids, and it's mostly boys who have gaming fixations. ADHD is overrepresented in that group, who will sit in a chair for 16 hours at a time without moving, except their thumbs and fingers.
Yeah.
That's not conducive to sustaining good health. So, so I have sleep, I have food, I have exercise, and I say downtime, whether that's meditation, whether that's something fun for you, whether it's just quiet me time. Really, all of those are separable and important in their own ways, but I think some of that's important when you're scheduling so that you at least know that's in your life. Otherwise, it's unbearable to, plan 8 hours of work and high pressure stuff every day. So, so separate from those four basics, what are other treatments that are being offered for ADHD? There are a lot of biofeedback, neurofeedback centers that are getting several $100s for each treatment. And every single study that's been published shows minimal benefits. That doesn't mean they aren't really there, but they haven't been able to demonstrate it. And if they're bringing in that much money and treating so many people for so long, they should be able to demonstrate more than they've been able to demonstrate.
And those are what? Sorry, I never heard of this category.
Neurofeedback. So most of them are meaning people that change their alpha waves, the theta waves, or brain waves.
Oh, yeah, I've never heard.
It's a big lucrative business.
It sound. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being a little. I'm very. If it's not falsifiable, it's not science kind of thing. Like that sounds like a lot of bullshit. No.
Well, the data is really weak so far, but that doesn't disprove that there isn't something real there. But they haven't demonstrated it, and for treating so many people and making in so much money, and sort of most of them are stridently anti-medications at all. It seems strange that their own data is so
It.
poorly kind. One, it's just aren't a lot of studies. A number of studies have been done show most of the benefits could be just non-specific effects of coming in and playing games with a therapist.
Okay, so I have another question. I guess your only answer could be intuitively what I'm saying, because there's no study really. I kind of repeat what Dr. Gabor Mate is.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kind of like it's in his direction. It's something that I tested. Again, it's anecdotal, but like, tell me what you think of the intuition on this. Is that one thing I noticed, and this took me many years to figure out, is that at the end of the day, for whatever reason, my biggest thing with ADHD that was hurting my life is that I would always, when I faced challenges, whether it's boredom, so challenge is like any discomfort. So discomfort could be boredom, a relationships being difficult, a business showing feedback, like pushback. So a business, you start a business or you start a job, and then it starts pushing back on you. So all these discomforts in my life, for some reason, when I would encounter them, it would make me panic and disappear. So I would want to jump. I would want to. Okay, okay, you're boring. You're boring to me right now. Well, okay, I'm gonna go watch a YouTube video. You're this thing. This relationship is annoying. Okay, well, let's jump to something else. This job is whatever. Let me blow it up and get into an argument with people. And my pattern in life was always to blow things up because they were either boring or I found discomfort. So in his category, and again, I did this on my own, is like I was realizing, okay, I have a disassociation problem. I just want to disassociate when things get bad. So what I did is started meditating on fears, which I felt like that was the underlying thing. I started meditating a lot on the fears, and like kind of do what the Stoics. This is like a very ancient like practice, which is like you meditate on what scares you and you repeat that in your head over and over and over and over again. And surprisingly, it worked like magic for me. And I know that Dr. Gabor Mates says something similar, which is like face the underlying kind of like trauma or face the, you know, um, and again, it worked magic for me. And now I don't need any meds, or sure, I have days that I have more ADHD than others, but what do you think of that intuitively? I know you don't have research on, I know there's no, but what do you think about that intuitively?
I think if it works for you, great. I think what's really important distinction I would get into it. So one of the 9 indicative DSM-5 criteria is that on tasks that require more effort, the person avoids them or gives up or doesn't complete to move forward with them. So that aligns with your experience. And so what's crucially important for your point is whether that avoidance, distraction, and we have a specific meaning of dissociation, so I wouldn't use it as broadly as you used there. I don't see that mostly as a fear-based problem in most of the adults that work with ADHD. So, I mean, an example is, I know they have to move the car because it's street cleaning day and their cars can get a ticket if they don't, but hey, their favorite team's in the basketball playoffs and they just can watch
Yeah.
one more quarter, one more, and then 2 hours go by and then they go to the other playoff game. And it's distraction. It's not consciously or even unconscious. It's not a fear-driven avoidance for most of them. So my objection for Gabor Mate, even though he's been writing about mental health issues, and he knows a lot, writes eloquently, he speaks to people, a lot of what he writes resonates, but he doesn't fundamentally have training in mental health. He was a cardiologist, general practitioner. And he does have personal experience with ADHD, but in many ways, he reverts back to where psychiatry was in the 50s of blaming bad parenting trauma for the ADD picture and ignores a lot of the basic science that's there that shows strong genetic components. And clearly, there are a lot of people, given the genetic heritage or strength of ADHD, lots of people with ADHD grew up in chaotic households. We know they are at more risk of having trauma early in life, and their own ADHD predisposes them to creating more trauma. And so there's a huge overlap between the two, but I've worked with lots and lots of people who don't know their parents were completely supportive and helpful. They didn't have any major adversity or trauma, and yet they still have robust ADHD. So again, I think there is some considerable subpopulation where trauma is key to unlocking or helping ADHD, but I strongly push back against the notion that that's all of what's going on with ADHD, and that that's true for everyone with ADHD.
Okay, so last question, and thank you very much. This was really awesome. But last question: what if someone really did all the work that you just mentioned, right? Which with cognitive behavioral therapy, sleep, food, and exercise, and was really strict with all those things. Um, do you think that they have a good shot of managing life without meds?
It depends what life they want. So this is paraphrasing Ed Hallowell, who wrote Driven to Distraction. He really pushes most of his books, Ritalin and Adderall. And if you don't read them closely, it makes it sound like that's going to cure things. So two things I'd say. The drugs never cure ADHD. They never even reduce it to zero. They help people manage. But so Hallowell used to end all his lectures with, what's really important for anyone with ADHD is finding the right job and finding the right partner. And by that, I mean, is that important for everyone? Sure it is. But it's more important for people with ADHD because they have more trouble creating their own structure and organization for their lives. But I've seen people with robust ADHD who are, I mean, people who are 80 and have robust ADHD, you know, live most of their lives before they were even aware it could be existing in adults. Some of them have had lives that were trash fires and horrible disaster and other, and others found people who were the right kind of support and the right kind of job that was interesting enough and let them be creative enough, but didn't give them so much rope that they would strangle themselves with it. So it's the right amount. So I've seen people who, have substantial ADHD symptoms, but who are able to craft a life where they could either get off of medications or reduce medications, or some who never got onto medications have better regulation. But I've also had people who, used all those techniques and still had challenges and felt that the best approach for them was to confront. Usually, I try periodic drug vacations. People can see, what is this really doing for me? This is helping or not. And actually, a notable place is in pregnancy. I've worked with a lot of pregnant women who were worried. Should I be off these medicines during pregnancy? And some we worked and functioned okay enough off it, and some were so dysfunctional, which itself causes risks to the fetus, but they decided, particularly again, that the evidence is minimal for, it's one of the few areas where Ritalin actually looks maybe more risky for a baby than amphetamine does. And it's
Wait.
not a percentage of risk.
Also, the pregnant lady continued taking Adderall. Some continued.
Yeah, yeah, some did. And we have good epidemiologic data that is not finding any prematurity, other risk factors, other developmental issues in kids who are pregnant while their mothers are taking prescription amphetamine. I mean, it's increasing issue because we've become more and more aware of ADHD in women, and again, prevalence of many people going to medications as a way to treat it.
Wow. So a pregnant lady taking Adderall, and that's not uncommon. That's.
I mean, unfortunately, it's increasingly common. Again, I
You're
mean,
saying
ADHD.
unfortunately?
Well, I mean, part of it is that, I mean, I won't get into abortion debates and things like that. Part of it is that most people, most women don't even know they're pregnant when they're first pregnant. It takes missing a period or two before they're sure, which means first month or two, they've already been taking their medication.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That's. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit in shock that some pregnant women continue with
Well,
their.
I mean, when ADHD is, probably 4 or 5% of young adults have ADHD, and
Wait. So
that's
do
normal.
doctors sorry do doctors tell them to quit, or sometimes they
Actually,
don't?
most it depends where they are. If they're in an area that doesn't know anything, they probably say quit everything. But the OBGYNs in the San Francisco area, most of them are pretty informed. Again, the risks are the risk of depression, anxiety, not managing their nutrition or sleep are higher medication. All of those are risks to your fetus. So again, most OBGYNs I've interacted with or worked with are, yes, if you're, it makes sense to try to get off or lower the dose, but if that doesn't work, don't freak out, because again, particularly for amphetamine, we're not seeing any substantial increased risk to the infant. There may be tiny risks with methylphenidate drug.
I see. Okay. All right, doctor. So this was really great. Where could people follow you and learn more about you and about your content and your channel? Yeah, where could people get more of you?
So I have a YouTube channel where every Tuesday I give a live presentation of about 20 minutes. It's under Dr. John Cruz on YouTube, and that's Kruse. I also write on Medium, which is a writing platforms. There, about once a week, I have an article. So those are the two main ways to find me.
Okay, and guys, I will link it below. All of his links will be below in the description. Okay. Well, doctor, thank you very, very much for your time, and I think this was really informational. Yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I hope my somewhat different perspective than yours didn't push back too strongly. I appreciate being able to
No,
share it.
you have to have every perspective. That's the way to learn, right? Like you can't. Yeah, yeah. Okay, doctor. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, have a wonderful day. Okay, bye.